Hi. I wanted to think more deeply about creativity and lateral thinking, so it seemed worthwhile to have a conversation with Clayton Hester. His regular newsletter, Laterally, is one of my favorites, and in what follows, we talk about and explore many of the topics that he has thought and written very deeply about. You can find his work at claytonjhester.com, and all links to everything we talk about, you'll find them in the description. Just so that I don't interrupt the conversation midway, I'm going to mention the channel sponsor now, but if you'd like to skip ahead to the talk itself, you can just jump ahead to the time that I'm showing on the screen right now. This episode is sponsored by Hook Sounds. You'll know that at the center of many creative projects is the music, but as someone who creates online content, I know how difficult it can be to find really high quality music that's well produced, that doesn't belong to somebody else. And even in the worst case scenario, your content can be demonetized, or you can even have your content removed if you cross certain licensing boundaries. So to address this problem, Hook Sounds gives you access to a library of high quality, well-produced music. You can get everything from epic and serious to playful and fun, futuristic, lo-fi. I could go on, but for just under $15 a month, you get access to a premium subscription, which is going to give you access to all the songs, all the sound effects as well, and even intros and outros that you can use in your creative projects. There's no extra payments. The downloads are unlimited once you have that subscription, and the licenses are valid for life. And on top of that, there's new music being added regularly. So you have a ever-growing creative library of music that you can use in your projects. If you use the link in the description of this video, I'll get a small commission on any purchases you make, just full disclosure. But you can also use the promo code Dylan10, that's DYLAN10, Dylan10, and then you get an extra 10% off on any subscriptions that you purchase. Any music you do hear in this video is a Hook Sounds production, and if you want to check out that song in particular, I will add a link to that as well in the description of this video. Thank you very much to Hook Sounds for sponsoring this episode. And now we turn to my conversation with Clayton Hester. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. You, on your website, you actually mentioned that you have three passions: writing, filmmaking, and then podcasting and conversations. And when I saw the conversation thing, I actually wanted to talk to you because I think of conversations kind of like an art that actually needs to be practiced.
Yes.
And I think if you look at conversations you had or I had 5 years ago compared to now, probably the thing I've learned the most is just that being a good communicator doesn't actually mean necessarily being a good speaker. It actually means being a good listener. And so giving the other person the opportunity to share thoughts with you, and most importantly, to be curious. So in that spirit, I'd like us to go into this conversation today. And I just want to ask you, you write a lot about creativity, which means you're clearly someone who's thinking about it a lot, more than the average Joe. In your mind, in your opinion, what does it mean to be creative?
I think it has a lot to do with being able to see things differently in as far as you can then use that way of seeing things differently to imagine things differently. I think there are some classical ideas of kind of what imagination was, and in some of them it basically just imagining had to do with just simply being able to come up with that mental imagery. I think that that in relationship to kind of that classic idea of like fantasy, so in a sense reverie, daydreaming, and things like that, if you have that ability to, I suppose, imagine the world from a different perspective enough to then be able to have that sort of fantasy upon it that you can, see some sort of solution, whether it's a business solution or whether it's an artistic piece that would, be great on this, sidewalk or something like that, or on this street corner or something like that, that would be able to capture something that is within you, or distill down something that you feel needs to be said, something along those lines. That's what I think creativity is about in the individual person. I think that it is really about also being able to not make snap judgments about yourself or about the ideas that you're coming up with. So a lot of folks will be, they'll think to themselves of something that they'd like to do, or something that they think would be, that were, just like, oh, I'll never do that. They'll think to themselves and think about some crazy idea, and it's like there are too many variables involved to make that sort of thing happen, and that could involve, like we say, business. That could involve, some sort of other creative exploit, whether it's the book that they've wanted to put together, or something along those lines, or being able to, maybe tell their family story or something along those lines in a meaningful way, or something along those lines. But so it involves also not ruling things out before you give them the chance to breathe, because I think we do that too much of the time. We will stifle ideas, and, sure, we have to kind of come up with priorities, but I don't think that we need to allow our priorities to smother new ideas either, because, if you allow yourself to be taken away or carried away with it, then, you may end up exactly where you daydream that you were hoping to be in that case.
Yeah, it's almost like to be creative, you have to permit or allow creativity to just do its job, and you have to try and get out of the way, right?
Yeah.
And we're constantly getting in the way of ourselves because we're telling ourselves, like you mentioned, all the different variables that come up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you said something in the beginning that I maybe want to touch on, which is when I asked you about creativity, one of the first things you mentioned was the imagination. So I the word imagination has always been interesting to me because it's literally the image, the capacity within us to I don't want to reduce it down to images, but to create maybe mental images. And I think some
Yeah.
people, from what I've heard, some people think in images more than others. So perhaps that's why we think of autistic people. When I say autistic, I picture a guy painting, right?
Yeah.
And it's that capacity to take something internal and, in a sense, ephemeral, immaterial, and to actually uh, incarnate it, to make it material, right?
Mm-hmm.
And do you think we all have that capacity? It just needs to be fostered.
I tend to think so. I think that most things are learnable. I guess I have a fairly pliable view of, our
Yeah.
humanity here, and, I think that psychology tends to suggest that as well. I, can't go into exactly the details of that because I'm not really a psychologist, but I would say it's just it's interesting because I think that the humans are resilient, and I think in as much they are also, pliable to themselves and capable of such self-development to, whether it's, they've halfway thought about being a musician when they were younger, and now it's something that they are actually beginning to take seriously. And it's like, oh, I see this through line all the way back to when I was a kid, where I had, always loved the drums or something like that. And,
Mhm.
it's kind of like, now this is something where I never thought that this would be possible. But life, being as organic and full as it is, can provide us so many different opportunities to actually approach these different dreams and maybe even whims that we have, because certainly I've chased several whims, and and that they can be as gratifying in terms of just, actually, having tried something and having dabbled in something, because I think that those inform a lot of other things, because the different learning experiences all kind of cross-pollinate. So they can provide inspiration well outside their particular box that you try to fit them into. But all of that in mind, I think, I think that people have a ton of potential in terms of just allowing themselves to approach something. I think that probably is the biggest thing, is whether or not we feel as though we've been pigeonholed. I think it's the self-concept thing. It's probably a mental thing more than it is a problem of actually being able to store that memory. Memory is something that is much more vast than we think of, even though we forget so much and the like, and perhaps misconstrue so much in our own memories. But it's capable of remembering quite a lot, and certainly we don't have time to necessarily be like the perfect Renaissance man or woman, having mastered all of the skills as much as we'd like to, and as much as I guess I try to here and there. But no, I think we all have a lot of flexibility and room that we can grow into.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's sad when someone thinks that they can't learn how to paint or they can't learn how to play an instrument. I think oftentimes you learn to paint or you learn to play an instrument so that you can express your creativity. So it's more of a, I mean, when you're learning the guitar, for example, you're really learning, you're embedding things within your muscle memory so that eventually at some point you don't have to think about how to play the guitar. So the guitar kind of just becomes the thing that you use to interface with your imagination. And unfortunately, I think people, okay, guitars, you kind of just have to learn it, I guess. You can't just pick up some strings and start hitting them and expect there to be, great sounds. But there's other things that I think you don't necessarily need to develop the mechanical skills before you can get started. I think you can just get started and the mechanical skills will develop as a consequence. So it's like you don't wait till the iron's hot before you strike it. You actually make it hot by striking it. And I think of writing like that. Like when I sit back and think of my writing, I think I think I'm a terrible writer. But then when I actually am writing and I hit this flow, I think, man, I'm really, really loving this. And it's like with each sentence, you almost get better. And I think it's the willingness to be bad at something until you're good at it, which comes back to the kind of patience with yourself and the willingness to allow yourself to be creative, even if it sounds bad or if it looks bad, or all of these various factors we're talking about kind of point in the same direction, which is in some ways you have the creativity, but you just have to learn how to express it. And I think writing is probably easy to learn but hard to master. So maybe I could just ask you a little bit about that. You write a lot. I get, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is because I get a lot of emails from your blog, which I really enjoy. And you actually wrote one on your Substack blog recently, talking about the topic of play. Yeah. And I think it's Thursday theses you do, Thursday thesis, which is such a cool idea. Do you assign days to specific goals because you find it helps you stick to a routine, or is it kind of just on a whim?
So I do actually, most everything that I do, except for now the creativity news that I've started trying to do, where I try to summarize different, headlines that are going on throughout the world, whether it's business, arts, etc. I try to basically I schedule everything ahead of time. So usually I will be scheduled like 3 months in advance to have like everything set up to go, because before I ever started the blog, the newsletter, I had everything set up for the month to go, and then the next couple of months. Substack will let you like do it for about 3 months, and Anyway, I'm actually falling behind right now. I've got like the month of January to catch up on because
Wow.
so so that's going to be a struggle here one of these days when I can actually sit down and do it. But I keep myself charted out ahead of time so that I have everything um, all kind of squared away, so I don't have to like in the spur of the moment go after it. That being said, I did have a period of time where I would basically sit down in order to catch up. And I'll probably have to go into this catch up mode again where I, write just, I'd try to write, I don't know that sometimes I accomplish this. I think it was probably only a few instances I'd accomplish it. I'd try to get myself to write 6 articles or something like that, and a
Wow.
spell or something like that. But it whether or not that those were actually good or whether they were actually like lengthy and exhaustive, that's a whole nother question. But I did try to challenge myself in that way. Nowadays, I just try to get like 2 or 3 to get get out in order to actually get some sort of headway made in terms of keeping up with the Substack. Because if I were writing it, week to week, oh gosh, that would be a terrible disaster because of my lack of consistency, really. And the most consistent thing has just been blocking out a night of the week, Wednesday nights, really, although not this week for some reason or another. I would just sit down and basically try to generate as much writing as I could about this and that, and you get into the flow, kind of like you said, and that, and you get into that kind of state. It's not that doesn't always happen, but thanks be whenever it does, because man, that certainly helps. But yeah.
Yeah, well, is writing the main way that you find you express your creativity? Or is it the main way you get your ideas out into the world?
I think so in a lot of ways. It it's it's a it's kind of something I'm figuring out. I dabble in a lot of different arts, to because I just find that so. I think just it's a really refreshing thing to be able to dabble in so many different things, and not necessarily put yourself under a whole lot of pressure to learn it perfectly or to learn it now, as opposed to, say maybe by the time I have, children, grandchildren, I'll be able to play the fiddle or something like that, which has been something I'm interested
Not a
in
bad goal.
doing. Yeah, yeah. Although I did get a mountain dulcimer recently. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those, but
I have no idea what that is.
I think it's pretty much it's basically our I think it's pretty much American grown, but yeah, it's just this lap instrument. And anyway, I got one of those from a friend, and it's this beautiful. And I never knew that I'd be fascinated as much by this as I did, but I've just been so engrossed with it. And that's speaking to some of that about not hemming ourselves in too much. I think it's just kind of like whenever you come across a new fascination, it's always good to just let yourself be caught up in it. It's kind of that tension that I have to balance out to find a happy medium between, letting myself get carried away by something new on a daily basis and actually trying to meet some of the goals that I have. But I think that's probably part of the dynamic of the play element that I was writing about in there. It's just picking up something new and just playing around with it and seeing what it inspires you to do or what makes you think about and how that could be applied elsewhere, or perhaps if you wanted to keep pursuing this. But yeah. And writing allows so much of the time, it allows me to explore things that I otherwise would not necessarily be able to do. And I these kind of passing whims that I have on a day-to-day basis that otherwise I might just, let fly away. I now can just write as a note and be like, hey, we need to write a new article about, this or that, about, what was one of those recent ones? I don't remember exactly, but there was that one recently I enjoyed about hypnosis that has been one of my hypnosis and whether it unleashes a natural talent or something like that.
I remember that one, yeah. And the one about, I think the most recent one was about, can you hear all the sounds at once?
Yeah. That website about all of the basically breaks down all the different genres into, to try to crystallize them into something specific so you can search through them. And it's absolutely insane. I love it so much. But yeah. So a little bit of depth and breadth in terms of what gets covered, but no, it's writing has become a major way of allowing me to express myself. And I think within the creator economy, it's the starting point for different creative things that I want to do, because I want to get people acquainted with my particular vision, in order to help build up an audience, as I think we're all trying to do, and trying to reach people. And eventually the goal is to do more film. And I absolutely love that medium, because it's such a confluence of so many different things, because it's acting, it's visual art, it's music, it's all of those different things combined, and I absolutely love it. And so one of these days, that'll be, as I kind of build things up, that's the goal. And so the goal now is kind of to get that audience going that gets acquainted with me and my particular style. And so I can also have something whenever I have these different art projects, I have a group of people to deliver them to. And I write about on different days, like the Lateral Saturdays post, where I, not always, but oftentimes whenever I have some sort of project going on, I'll kind of think through it with them. Kind of like, I wrote one early on that's probably been my most read, was about, can you write a novel on Instagram or something like that? It's like, can I just take this very unconventional way of sharing my content, my art, to the followers that I've got on Instagram, and hope maybe get them to attract to this particular area, this particular focus, in my particular account, to generate some of that interest. And it's kind of giving away your art for free in a sense, but also it's, if that is in exchange for having that audience built up and continuously growing, then that's a worthwhile trade, I think, in a lot of cases. But yeah,
I think of it as like I don't know, I don't think of it as a loss, giving your things away for free or creating something positive, because you do attract people who are interested in the same things. And if you have 100 people that watch it and 99 of them aren't interested, but one guy is interested, you'll find that there are people out there who are as interested in that same thing as you, and there's no one else making that kind of content. So they instantly feel a connection to you, and then you have a fan, right? And they want to see what you create, and they want to share it with other people, and that will continue to grow. And I think I read somewhere that you really only need 1,000 true fans, like 1,000 people that really love what you make, and from there on, you've basically got a community. And it's easy for us to compare ourselves to these guys who have 100,000, 200,000 followers, but it's really about the quality of the community as opposed to the quantity. You touched on whims a little bit earlier. I've always been somebody who gets very obsessed with a specific thing or even a specific person. I had a Stephen Fry, believe it or not, like obsession when I was in high school, and I was just reading all of his books and I was watching all of his old TV shows, um, and well, in high school, I didn't really have a personality. I was kind of a mishmash of different people at different times, depending on what seemed to make the most sense. So I adopted a lot of the way I saw the world was very influenced by people that I would go through deep interest in. And the word obsession might be a bit strong, but I was very passionate about different things. And the issue was always the tension you mentioned between, focusing on what you know is important and might have been a very passionate whim a week ago, and you want to maintain, versus letting yourself be carried away by the current whim or the current thing that's pulling at you, right? Although I do think there are some whims that stick, and I think those are the ones you kind of have to lean on because they stick for a reason, right? I got really obsessed with playing the guitar when I was in high school, and it's been I think over 10 years now, and I still love it. And I think it's because it's endless. There's no there's no point at which you think, okay, I've learned enough. I'm at the level now where I can quit. There's always another style, another technique, another motor skill you can develop. And I think of writing in the same way. I think writing is in a sense endless. That it's always difficult, but it's eternally gratifying. I'm curious what you think. I'll sometimes write something, and as I write it, I think this is no good, and then I'll reread it later, and I'll think, man, where did this come from? Right? Where did
Yeah.
this idea come from? And I sometimes think of it almost like a random number generator, just throwing out, but as opposed to numbers, it's ideas. And sometimes you'll make a connection that you would not have made if you were just sitting and thinking to yourself.
Yes.
And I don't know about you, but I'm quite extroverted. In my professional career, I work as effectively a lecturer, so I teach and I train people, um, and I think out loud. So my wife is the complete opposite. If I ask her a question, what should we eat for dinner? She'll sit and she'll think. Had this yesterday. We had that. I'll say, okay, well, we did this yesterday. We had that last week, and I think verbally, I think in words, I think out loud. So writing, I don't actually know what I think until I put it on paper. It's like formalized
Yeah.
thinking. What do you think of that? Do you find writing helps you be more sane, if I could put it bluntly?
I think so. I think so. And I think I forget where it's from, but I heard a quotation about how do I know what I think till I see what I say, or something like that. And and that to me is like that's the art of conversation there, and as well as I think in a lot of ways the art of writing, because yeah, it becomes a way to crystallize, a way to draw the connection points and the lines between the dots, and to bring the broader picture into focus. Um, and so, yeah, for me, it becomes a way to sit down with a lot of different things that have been going through my mind, a lot of different interests, and kind of, bring it all into focus. Um, and for me, it's kind of like, well, I may any given day have this sudden rush of energy to actually like sit down and start writing like a a short play or something, a one act play or something like that. Sometimes that I'm so moved by 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 something that's going on in life. It's like it's like now is the time for me to write something literary or something for stage, or it's like I it's kind of one of those spur of the moment type things, because that's the way, I guess, that you get the sense that you could jump into flow all of a sudden. But it is it's a lot of being able to digest, and being able to, to dig into your thoughts. And like you said, it's something where I think when it comes to our intellectual memories and our memories of specific ideas, and maybe I don't know if like the term meta memory or something like this would apply, but when it comes to remembering these observations, these more abstract ideas, sometimes they roll around with us and they stay with us, but a lot of the times, you see something fresh because you forget that you planted it there, you put it into writing. And so that's a lot of the time whenever I have some sort of new story idea or a new article idea, I if there's something connected to it, I want to get it down there on a blank sheet or blank note as much as possible, because I don't want to lose the specific vibe of it. I don't want to lose the specific feeling that I have with it, and the kind of different pieces that are coming together into focus with it, because those I think are easily forgotten, and sometimes they can be uncovered. There's kind of like I guess a mental archaeology that sometimes you do, and sometimes
Mm.
you stumble back onto the things that have gotten gotten dusted over within your own mind whenever you set out to write. It's like, oh yes, that's what I had in mind. That's the missing piece that I was going to use. But no, and writing, I think, is a really good thing, for the psyche, for the soul, for the mind to be able to have this way of, you know, I suppose kind of. I mean, it's a monologuing, but in a lot of ways, most monologuing, I suppose, in a sense, is dialoguing, but with oneself.
Yeah, that's true.
And so that allows for an opportunity, a little bit of that art of conversation with the blank page.
Yeah, yeah, and you actually in that I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but in that article on play, you
Hmm.
actually say the following. You write, "It is my central thesis here that play is exercise." Sorry, quote, "It is my central thesis here that play is exercise for intuition, tapping us into an instinct for creativity. Play comes about as we suspend our judgment, which is an important part of finding creative ideas." And I really love this line that you wrote. You say, "The muscle memory of our imagination atrophies when we do not exercise as we should." So play is actually a form of, sorry, end quote. Play is actually a form of exercising our imagination. And, when I was reading that, I used to be really into another person I was really obsessed with was, I don't know what you would call him. I'm just going to say philosopher, Alan Watts. And he had an interesting point, which is that play, we tend to think of play as something trivial. So like, oh,
Hmm.
I'm just playing, but it's not trivial when you go and watch the play Macbeth, because it's discussing very deep elements of the human experience, and it's not trivial when someone plays Mozart, right? So play can be play has many levels, and you can kind of play like my daughter's now 7 months old, so I'll sit and play with her, and we're literally just stacking cups, and she's loving that. But she's through that play, she's learning things about the environment, and I don't think that ever stops. I think even as an adult, when we play, even though it might be on higher levels, it might be playing an instrument, it might be playing through the form of writing, it might be playing through the form of doing art, you're still learning things about the environment and about yourself in the same way that a 7-year-old baby learns through play with their environment. And I would just use that as kind of a jumping off point to talk about something I've been noticing, which is, I don't know if it's just me. I don't know if it's just the people I'm around. I don't know if it's my specific bubble, but people seem to be busier these days than when I was younger. And it's always tricky to say that because you don't know if it's just because you were younger and you weren't worried about the things they worried about that you worry about now. But even when I speak to my elders, they'll tell me the same thing. They'll say, "Yeah, people are so busy that we actually schedule play." So
Yeah.
we even turn play into a into a thing we have to schedule, right? We turn it in, and I can't just play. I have to have an app on my phone that tracks how many times this week I played, so I can get the statistics and I can see, okay, I met my weekly habit count of play. Do you find that as well? Do you feel like people just don't take play seriously enough?
I think so. And I would add, just as far as the observation that everyone's busier, and I think this goes with it, is that it's interesting because I speak to my great grandmother whenever I get the chance. I'm blessed to still have her, and she will, say something about how time is moving along and how it's going so fast, and she'll make some sort of, like, observation that it seems like, when she was younger, that younger people did not pay much attention to how fast time was moving along as much as they do now. And so that's interesting to me, because it seems as though that may be a symptom of our busyness as we continue to have, I guess, these ridiculously overpacked and overscheduled, kind of days. And part of that does give me, kind of that rush, but also it's one of those things where you got to make time for those those important things like play. And no, I think that I think that it certainly belongs within our schedule. Adam Grant is this organizational psychologist, and he wrote a wonderful book called Originals that I'm reading now. But he will also talk about how play, belongs within the framework of our, daily lives, within the schedule of our weeks. And it's something that needs to be a factor. It needs to be something that we can include within our daily or weekly framework. But it's yeah, it is kind of a strange thing that it has to be forced within the structure of all of the other things that we have going on. For me, anyway, I feel as though I don't do well scheduling play, and that so I guess I'm just, it's kind of a strange thing for me to talk about right now, but apparently I've been diagnosed with ADD, and so it's kind of like usually for me it's whenever I get in the like, oh, you know what, I could paint something right now, and so I'll just go and it's less about having it scheduled into it. It's more about me, going off on a whim, I guess, to chase something new, and so that usually play does get worked into my schedule, whether or not it's at the expense of something else, something that is loosely incorporated into my schedule that I suppose I could be doing other times. But it's something where I love to chase those rabbits, and so I end up either practicing an instrument for a little bit of time or something like that. So I think even if it means just kind of like dropping things and chasing those whims, that is good for you in a lot of ways. It may not mean the most productivity, but in a kind of organic sense, in a sense of helping yourself to, I suppose, kind of grow and to nourish that desire for play and the like. It certainly is beneficial.
Yeah, maybe we should just focus on that word play itself a little bit, just to clarify maybe what we mean to each other. Because
Sure.
to me, play is like something that you do for no other sake than the act itself. So
Yeah.
if I play a game of chess with you, I
Mhm.
might be playing the game to win, but that's
Mhm.
just a consequence of the structure of the game. There needs to be a winner and a loser in order to play the game, right? But
Yeah.
beyond that, we're not playing it for some higher reason other than to just spend that time. And it's also like, if I could quote Alan Watts again, you don't listen to a song to get to the end of the song. The point of the song
Yeah.
is not at the end of it, right? Otherwise, the best orchestras would be the ones that played the fastest.
Mhm.
And also, when you dance, you don't dance. The point of the dance is not to get to the end of the dance. In each moment of the dance, you are at the point of the dance. And I think of play that way. And I think even I often find it funny what's happened with meditation now, where like you meditate in order to just observe your mind, and you maybe meditate in order to just allow yourself to get away from the monkey mind that's constantly telling you what to do. And it's almost like we have habit trackers tracking our time doing these things that are meant to get us away from the fact that we're so obsessively keeping track of everything. And it's on that I wanted to come back to what you said earlier about what your great grandmother said. We're more aware of time now, in a sense. Maybe people have always been busy. I mean, I'm sure people have always had things to do. That's not new. But I think in some ways we're more, maybe for the worse, we're more conscious of time now, and we're aware of our day in a. I think if I could just be a little bit grandiose for a second, I think people are more aware of. We're more fearful of our mortality in a sense, and so we're really scared that we don't maximize our time and do what we can in the short time we have. And I think we're so bombarded by statistics and death and news and everything that we're constantly worried that, oh my goodness, and especially with the lockdown now, people I think are in some ways trying to maximize every second. And so anything that feels like any free time they have, they've got to use it as quickly as they can.
Yeah.
I'm really just thinking out loud and speculating, but I think a
Yeah.
lot of it has to do with our fear of wasting time. And so we fill it with as much as we can. And as a consequence, we just experience everything as too busy.
Yeah. I believe that you're probably onto something there, is that the paradox of it all is that the more that we get busy, the more that we uh, see that time slipping away. I don't know. It's it. I guess it's one of those things where the tighter that you clasp it, the more it runs through your fingers and the like. So I don't know. Time time is one of those things to me. So much of it, when we talk about it slipping away or talk about it, running by it, it's kind of one of those things that it's like growing up and seeing it move faster and faster. It's like thinking back, and all the, because my life, having just 23 years on this planet and everything, it seems very full with regards to, I've never traveled the world. I've never, really, I've only gone a few different times outside of Missouri, and so maybe people wonder, who is this guy to talk about, the world as this world of great possibilities. But I think of it as within the time span that you have, there's already so much that you've lived through and the like. But now as you're getting older, that things are moving faster and faster, and it's kind of, well, that existential kind of dread that we don't like, I guess. Instead, the existential delight would be, or
Well, yeah, I mean, that is it, right? Just
yeah.
I guess it's sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. It's a bit
No,
it's
you're
just
good.
weird with okay. So it is kind of, you get to choose how you view it, I think.
Yeah.
It can be sad that you have X amount of years, or you can be grateful that you have X amount of years. You think, man, I'm glad I got this many years to go, and
Mhm.
I'm glad I got to be here this long, and the things you do get to see, and there's, in some sense, there's uh, all of life can be found in another person, in a simple conversation with another person. I don't necessarily need to visit the peaks of the mountains of Taiwan to fully live life. I might find much more meaning in a conversation at a local deli with someone that I care about.
Mhm.
Now, that doesn't mean that you can't or you shouldn't do both, but it just means that I don't think you want to view life as a checklist. And I
Yeah.
think maybe, uh, I've often heard people talk about a bucket list, but I'll be honest, I don't really have one. It's more of an expression. But I feel like these days, maybe people do have an unconscious bucket list of things that they feel they need to do. Otherwise, they'll feel that they didn't maximize their time. And I also think, to be honest with you, I think it goes back to how you view life and how you view death. And if you see death as the end, then man, you got to maximize everything you
Mhm.
can every second, because there's nothing else, right? Um, then again, if you view life as a mystery, and you view death as a mystery, then there's a certain sense of excitement, and I think even hope, that can come to the time you have here. And you
Mhm.
might not understand it or have all the reasons, or you might not agree with how other people view that time. But I think at the very least, um, I think I think I think you'd have to be really, I don't know. I think it'd be very difficult to say that it's not a mystery, to not be curious about the fact that we're here at all. And I think it's from that. wonder that all the joy, all the delight, all the philosophy wonder is in many ways the beginning of philosophy, and all the desire to be creative, the desire to pursue things, that all comes from this appreciation for the fact that, wow, I'm here now, and let me grasp this moment fully, regardless of how long I'm here. So I went on a little bit of a rant there, but
No, yeah,
yeah,
that's good stuff. No, I love it. I love it. I do. No, I had begun to kind of ramble aimlessly there, and so it was good. No, I think that is a good way to. Yeah, I think look at that, and I will say, listening to your stuff before, I think has really had an impact in terms of how, when it comes to me thinking about viewpoints and the like, and thinking about how these different vantage points that we have of seeing the world and its mysteriousness, um, and that probably is one of the major impacts in terms of me thinking about, how to then reorient and think about, because I'm trying to think of which one it would have been. I want to say it would have been your interview with the Church of the Eternal Logos, uh,
David.
uh,
Yeah.
David. Yeah, I because yeah, one of them. Yeah, I don't know. It was kind of like just talking about like the mysticism of it and everything like that, because it really to me had a lot of, I don't know, a lot of interesting things to stew around on. And I think that when I talked about the altered states of consciousness in that one post, I think I was thinking about some of those similar topics that I think you all have had discussed on there, and I think that some of the examples I cite in there also come back to that, because I think it's kind of like we get into these different ways of experiencing that mystery, and therefore being able to pivot, whether it's meditating or whether it's just doing something exhilarating like a roller coaster ride, or doing something, like I'm fascinated by the whirling dervishes, in Turkey and within um, the Sufism tradition, and so it's kind of like, it is it's I don't know, that just these different states that I suppose you experience in order to see the world differently, or to kind of just, you know remind us of that we often are in this mundane perspective, and that there's just so much flexibility and so many different directions and levels to which we can experience the present reality. So I don't know.
Yeah, well, everything you just said is, I agree. I mean, the the propensity in life to become jaded, I think, is when we almost think too small, and we kind of get closed in us. We close ourselves in by ourselves. So you
Yeah.
get kind of cornered by yourself, and then you kind of think that just because you don't know, uh, because you're not curious, you start to think that the world is a boring place.
Hmm.
When in reality, the world is, I'll quote McKenna, I think he said that the world is not stranger than we think. The world is stranger than we can think. And I think if you, I think people react to that in different ways, right? I think some people think about that and they do feel fear, and I think they do feel anxiety. And I think when they think about the mystery of life, they actually maybe even panic a little bit. But I think other people, I think if they presume or they view the world as fundamentally, it's difficult to talk about this without using religious language, right? It's very difficult to not use religious language. But if they view the world as a place where good things can happen and there's a propensity for good, and
Hmm.
there's almost a redemptive nature to reality, I think then the mystery of life is exciting. But if you view the world as fundamentally violent and fundamentally evil and
Yeah.
fundamentally bad, then the mystery of life can be terrifying.
Yeah.
And so I think it's even before you consider the mystery, you got to take a step back and look at those presuppositions you're bringing into that question already.
Yeah.
It's like, well, do I see the world as a place where beauty exists, where joy exists, where love exists, or do I see it as all these things just delusions that I tell myself? And I think you can. Chesterton had this great line. He said, really all thought should be allowed, but there's one thought that actually ends thought, which is the thought that thoughts are meaningless. And if you think that, then you really can't go much further.
Hmm.
And if you feel that you're completely convinced about why everything happens and you have a complete understanding of why everything happens, well, the most certain person you're ever going to meet is the man in the insane asylum. He has a reason for absolutely everything. He knows exactly why everything happens, the way it happens. He's got a story. Every person is in on this. And I don't just mean a specific cabal of people in government, right? I mean, this guy believes literally everyone, they have a motive, and he can give you that motive, and he's so certain. And it's Chesterton says, he's not insane because he's lost his reason. He's insane because all he has left is reason. He just has, that's all he has left. He has no mystery. He has no imagination. He has no propensity to look up and just wonder. And it's like the guy who claims to be God. It's like, well, um, who thinks everybody's focused on him. It's like, well, when you walk down the street, if you think everyone's focused on you, you're never going to be interested in other people. You're living in this little prison of your own universe, and
Yeah.
you're the God. And I think Chesterton says, "What a sorry God you are! You are the creator of the universe, and we have to worship you." And so I say all of this just to kind of bring back to this point that mystery is essential. I think it's essential to uh, to sanity, and I
Hmm.
think that an expression of that mystery of the world, of that openness to reality, I think an expression of that, to bring it all the way back, is play.
Yeah.
Play, doing something for its own sake, is just an understanding that, you know what, I actually don't know everything, but I'm really gonna enjoy this painting, and I'm really gonna enjoy this article, and the one person it impacts, that's enough.
Yeah.
Um, so
Absolutely.
so I'd like to ask you, if you don't mind, on your website, and I really love this, you have a page titled "The Creative Thinker's Library,"
Yeah.
and you have 9 books which you recommend people check out for creativity. And instead
Hmm.
of instead of going through all 9, if I could only read one, or if a person could only read one, just to kind of start off with, what book would you recommend in terms of just an introduction to creative thinking?
Oh gosh. That is a great question. But the one that I guess I've been almost evangelistic about that I recommend so often, and I think it has to do with very much this play topic that we've been discussing, is it's called Range by David Epstein. It's about how generalists triumph in a specialized world. And so um really what he's after, are people that have, the kind of like low key Renaissance people, Renaissance men and women, and um, how, Van Gogh took basically forever to actually find his thing, the thing that would make him, you know, famous,
Van
that would
Gogh.
make him Van Gogh. Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, no. Um, he he would take forever to do that, but he was a priest, he spread the gospel to, I believe, like minors, and the
Oh,
like, and so that took that took some time, and later in life he would actually get around to painting. He'd been discouraged from painting, even though it had been there. There were the through lines of it throughout life, and the through lines of life are interesting because it's like, um, whenever I think of, I look to these filmmakers and the like, and it's like, the Coen brothers have been doing this since they were kids, or Spielberg was doing this when he was, a kid. And so it's kind of like, it's like, well, I don't have that as far as the filmmaking side of things. I've had that as far as the writing side of things. And, I think still, if you look back and, if you look back at different things where you think about, say, like, well, I mentioned like the fiddle, which I've always had a love for and have always wanted to try to figure out. It's like, hey, maybe this is actually that time where we find that thread and kind of complete it in life. I don't know. I don't know if life is, supposed to be like that setup and payoff, or that like, oh, we're getting back to this theme. This idea is coming back around, or something in the story of life, because the medium of life is a much different way of telling a story than like the novel or the biography. It's like just the abstraction of putting life on a page already. You've got so many sacrifices to make whenever it comes to that. And so I guess that the ideal medium to tell a life is the lifetime, and the human person is the the channel for that. So I guess that it has to be left to the divine in a lot of ways. But anyway, that's a whole side tangent. But no, I think fundamentally it's the question within range of when you begin, and you may dabble in an area or explore an area, and it may take forever for you to actually find your thing. You've accumulated all of these different pieces and parts that you've got now in your toolkit, and those all in all form kind of your edge. They form your strength and your unique perspective and your unique approach. And so yeah, range is full of great stuff like that. It also, it encourages amateurs, people that have a love for something but may not have the best, insider expertise. You've got that outsider insider dynamic. The outsider, because he's not as deep in the weeds looking at, I guess to expand on the metaphor, he's not in the weeds looking directly at the bugs. He's above it, and he may be able to give you his top down approach, and the like. And so there's a way of approaching things through sometimes a sort of naive perspective. It really just opens you up, I think, to a lot more willingness, I think, to perhaps take a rough edge as opposed to the one that's been completely sharpened by whether it's your own formal education or having that insider perspective or something like that, but having that outsider disruptive kind of edge. I think that that's it, is the disruption, and hopefully then kind of the constructiveness that comes from having a little bit of kind of a cross application of things, which is really what lateral thinking is all about in a lot of ways.
I was going to ask you about lateral thinking, but before I do, I wanted to just touch on something you said, which is how when you said something about how when you have to put life on the page, you have to make a lot of sacrifices, and that made me think of what I think you mean, and you'll just tell me if I'm wrong or where I'm wrong. What I think you mean is that when you tell a story, it's a highly condensed and distilled abstraction of everyday life, right? It's the most interesting aspect. So the moment you start telling that story, you don't mention the fact that the pillow was cold at night and they had to flip it over, and they they couldn't get to sleep and they had to go to the bathroom and all that stuff. So and life in many ways has this. Life is, in a sense, a story, and stories are condensations of this much bigger story, but we tend to think of the main story as quite boring because we've got all these extra bits that we have to do. And to be honest, I've actually forgotten the point I was going to make. But is that what you meant by sacrifices have to make?
Yeah. And I think that different groups, I believe the modernists, tried to explore some of this to try to put it all into, whether it's a single day or something, and all the thoughts that occur to you along the way in that single day. It's difficult because I couldn't imagine sitting down to, like, I don't know that we'll see if I do anything that's worth an autobiography, but if, I've thought about, sitting down to tell my own story or something like that. And all of the different things, from falling off the hay bale wagon at the, how old was I? I don't know. It's just, but I think that, it's like, it seems like it's very easy to like graft onto a specific set of events that become formative. The origin stories that we create for like fictional characters would require a lot more complexity and I don't know, a lot more humanity in a lot of ways, I think, than for our, our characters. I feel like I talk so much about Orson Welles these days, but my obsession with Citizen Kane lately is, kind of like, this character seems so fully realized in the sense that he is, he's got all of these different complexities. He's got wealth, but he doesn't have what he wants. He struggles with love because he never really had gotten much of that. He's got all these different things happening from a lot of different angles, and in a sense that because of how much of the story itself is really, the narrative is hinged on exploring the character. It is, I don't know, it might be fair to call it modernist in that sense. I don't know how much, how it seems difficult to define those different terms like that, and certainly kind of dangerous perhaps to use them is in that case. But you get these different elements which you begin to kind of try and think about these different things. And talk about my great grandmother again. I asked her something like that, and it's like, do you remember what your first memory would have been? And it's like, well, you can come up with so many different answers to that, and like I couldn't even remember that. And she's 96, and so it's like you like trying to think of that. It's like you ask somebody a hard question, and it's going to be hard, but it'd be hard for me. But you think about these different things and how, I don't know, you read these biographies and you begin to think about, maybe this is the strategy for success because I admire this person. I'm going to try to model my career after them or something like that. And it's like, oh, it's going to be infinitely more complicated than than any path that you think is going to take place. Because life is messy and it's not really prone as much to narratives. Individual incidents are prone to narratives, and I think that that's one of the great things about the art of communication. Is because I really love the idea of like the raconteur, the person that is like the old gentleman, I guess, that knows how to really spin a great yarn or something like that, and he knows how to really tell these stories and things like that. And hopefully that's a skill that I begin to develop more thoroughly. Today I feel as though I've been a bit monotonously rambling, but we'll see.
That's okay.
How it comes out on the other end.
That's okay. I've been following you though, and I think there's definitely something to be said for a certain class of person that is attracted to this kind of elderly, old, wise man archetype. And I notice it in people. I've met a lot of young guys, including yourself, and I notice it in myself as well, where there's this desire to wear suspenders, and there's a desire to smoke a pipe, and there's a desire to have a walking stick, and there's almost this. It's weird when you think about the things that interest you, because it's not like you choose what interests you, right? It's almost like those things grab you, and you can't help but be interested in that way of doing things. And you mentioned you kind of like this idea of the guy who's telling a story or spinning a yarn, I think is the expression you used. I think because you like that, you will you will familiarize with yourself with stories over time, and you will immerse yourself with other people who are like that, and one day you will embody that person just as a consequence of the fact that you are attracted to it and you enjoy it. And it's in a way the things that you love you end up becoming, because you naturally model yourself. And if you try and imitate someone else's life, I think something I've always realized is that the imitations are always superficial because they're very surface level. So, for example, there's this. I think it's a good channel on YouTube, Charisma on Command, where they'll
Okay.
look at like an a character in a show or a movie, and I'll just explain it in case someone's watching who doesn't know it. But then they'll basically look at how that person handled that situation, which is, by the way, fictional, and it's scripted. And then they'll look at how did this guy handle it and what can we learn from that. But in some ways, it's I'm not going to become like that guy by suddenly being more quiet in conversations or suddenly responding in this way instead of that way. And I'm going to be like a cheap imitation of somebody else as opposed to just developing who I am. And I don't remember where I read it or where I heard it, but um the greatest pleasure in life is becoming who you are. So I do think you'll be drawn to certain archetypes, if I could use that word, and certain characters and certain elements, and maybe you can learn a thing or two. But really, I'm trying to tie this back into creativity and imagination. But really, I think allowing yourself to play, allowing yourself to go through the various experiences that give you your general view and your general skill set and your general approach to situations is really what's going to shape you. And I think one day when you look back, it does probably strike you as a story, because I can already see now, and I'm sure you do too, if you look back at your childhood that you have had, and you look at your teenage years, you describe them in the format of a story. You'll say, well, I was born in this town and I met this person and this person had a big impact on me. And you automatically distill the events because that's what you remember. You don't remember all those various nights where you woke up and you looked out of the window, or unless there was a specific moment that struck you in a meaningful way, right? Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So I maybe we could bring that to thinking laterally. Elon Musk
Mhm.
just is on Twitter now. I don't know if you use Twitter.
I do. Yeah.
He's someone that strikes me as a lateral thinker because
Yeah.
he's got all these different areas of skills,
Hmm.
all these businesses. I know there's people that say he's like a sham and everything, but I'm
Yeah.
speaking as an outsider. Funny enough, we're actually born in the same town. He's from
Oh,
he's
wow.
from yeah, yeah, yeah. He's from Pretoria, South Africa, which is where I'm broadcasting to you from right now, which is where I was born.
Wow.
Um, just a random fact, but he's from what I've read, he has this thing called first principles thinking. He'll get things down to their most basic principles, and he'll
Hmm.
apply that in whatever business he's in. And that's like a skill set he's developed surely from the situations he's found himself in. So he can almost be put in any situation, and you don't want him to imitate other people's mindset and other people's thinking. You want him to
Yeah.
bring his general skill, um, as opposed to just getting a specialist who focuses on one thing. You want you want what's special about his general skill set, if that
Hmm.
makes sense. Um,
Yeah.
I'm curious what you think of that. Would that be lateral thinking? Is that too shallow a
I
definition? Or
I think so. I think so. Because if it comes down to breaking it down to its most basic form, when it comes to understanding and to exploring how to approach and to analyze, to model after these different things that are going on, um, I think that's lateral thinking in a lot of ways. And to be honest, I've been trying to find a good explanation for lateral thinking. And I mean, I write a whole newsletter on it as we've been discussing, but I only recently, like as in last night, came up with this. And I think that this this really gets it, is that lateral thinking is about where curiosity and creativity meet. So curiosity being about exploring something new, seeing the world different, changing that vantage point, changing that perspective, addressing it from a new standing point, a new particular angle. Whereas creativity is, about, creating something new and producing something new. So one is about seeing the world different, I think. The other is about dreaming about the world differently, I think, in a lot of ways. And so I think that that lateral thinking comes from being able to see those problems differently, being able to analyze it from a new perspective. And goodness knows that Elon Musk is an original thinker, to be sure. He certainly comes at these problems and looks at these problems from a new angle. And I think that the more that you allow, you train yourself to be willing to come up with these crazy ideas about how to solve one problem or another, whether it's kind of like the fact that there are new flip phones again. It's kind of like we've got these phones that fold again. It's like, oh, it's like that's a throwback, but it's new. It's new, and it's something that you would not have expected to come back. Although, you kind of have to wonder whenever it comes to that point, if those sorts of things come back, because everything old is new, and everything new seems to be somewhat old. But so ultimately, you see that recurrence. It's interesting, and I think that when it comes to that curiosity level, I think Musk has part of it, with that first principles. I would say that also I've read his comments about, or excuse me, rather not his comments, but I believe they were recorded from a guy that worked with him at PayPal. I want to say it was. I think that's where he worked before. But basically, talking about how Elon was always doing multiple projects at once. He never had one iron in the fire. And for somebody like me that's constantly trying to juggle all those irons, it's kind of like there's a catch-22 to it when it comes to being managing to overwhelm yourself. But I think there's a real value in not, in allowing yourself to be caught up in multiple things at once to keep it fresh, and keep insights coming from one direction and applying them from each direction and bringing them all together, and cross-pollinating, cross-fertilizing, all those different things. I think there's a real value in that, because you keep learning and you keep growing, and there's always something new to see and to do with it.
Yeah, that's a really great insight. You approach the situation with the mindset that you might have just applied to a completely different project, a completely different okay, so you've got one project that requires a specific approach and a specific mindset, and then you suddenly switch to something different, and now you need a different mindset, but it's not like you're a different person. You're applying the same ideas and the same concepts now to a different situation. You might see something that someone who's just focusing on that problem wouldn't see. I think it was Schopenhauer, the German philosopher, who was extremely cheerful. That was a joke. He was very depressing, but he had this he he had this beautiful line, and you got to be careful these days when you attribute a quote to someone, because you really don't know anymore who said what. But let's just assume he said this. The idea is worth it. Beautiful line. Talent hits a target no one else can hit, but genius hits a target that no one else can see.
Yes.
And that is, I think, probably the benefit of lateral thinking, is that nobody else can actually see this target, because they're not looking at it with the many layered eyes that you're looking at it through. So if someone wanted to be a better lateral thinker, what would you suggest they do? Just start reading 3 books at once?
I don't think that would hurt. I think that help. I think going back to it, play would be a great place to start. I think allowing yourself to dive into those subjects, and those things that you you have no idea what you're doing, but you're going to tackle them anyway. You don't know how the first thing about linear perspective in painting. You don't know the first thing about how to frame a good photograph or how to pick up a guitar, but you can begin to slap some paint onto a canvas. You can begin to snap some photos of your dog in the yard, or you can attempt to improvise on guitar or whatever instrument that you pick up. And that in itself is a value, is learning to improvise and learning to see things differently. I think play would be a big part of it. I think also finding a way to spend the day differently. If you want to begin like to kind of excite your mind and perhaps maybe get a dopamine rush, which I know is a big part of flow. One of the books on the creative thinkers library list is about flow, and well, actually two of them are about flow. One is called The Art of Impossible, which I'm also listening to now. And Stephen Kotler writes about how once you get into the flow, the thing that makes it feel so good, that keeps you going, is that that dopamine hit that comes from I'm in it, I'm after it, I've got it going. I think that the flow comes from a little bit of that. When you have one of those breakthroughs. Recently, my main screenplay, what I've decided is my main screenplay, I kind of juggle a few different writing projects at once. I recently came up with the breakthrough that made it make sense in a lot of ways. And so, when that happens, when you hit that breakthrough about something that you've been thinking about for a while, it's kind of, things begin to churn, and you kind of get that dopamine rush, and you're rushing to your paper and trying to get out as much as possible and trying to get everything to come out in a way that it's all kind of tumbling over one another, and you try to put it out there and try to put it out on paper. And for me, it was putting it out on a graph and kind of layering it all out there, because I've realized that graphing things out has become one of the most interesting ways, I think, of taking notes and taking notes about what I'm working on. Because I think I'm probably one of those visual thinkers in a lot of ways, because when I come back to text, it's just kind of like, I don't need that.
I can hear it in your... Oh, sorry, man. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just wanted to say one thing, which is I can hear it in the way you speak. You tend to use a lot of metaphors just as you describe things. So as you're speaking, the words you're using are creating images in my mind. So you definitely strike me as somebody who thinks visually and probably learns visually. You probably enjoy charts and mapping things out and being able to see the big picture all at once, I'm sure. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go for it.
No, you're good. You're good. But play, seeing the world differently. I would say, just also not letting yourself be limited by, the self-concept that you have of, saying something about how I'm not an artist, I'm not a business person, I'm not, a scientist, and maybe I guess you have to get some sort of degree to technically be one. But hey, lay science and amateur scientists, I think, are an interesting thing. Whether that just means keeping, kind of this nature book of sorts or something like that. I think that would be a really interesting thing to do. And if I had kids, I'd absolutely be out there. I'd be out there like looking at bugs with them or something like that. You know what I mean? It's like there's a lot there. I think that would be a lot of interesting detours to get into. I don't know. I guess it depends how much bug kids I'd have, but
well, maybe you turn them into bug kids by
maybe
taking them out.
Yeah.
But I love that idea, though, of actually having kind of allowing yourself, just because if you think about the limitations we put on ourselves, right? I think a big one is age, especially on the internet. A lot of us tend to think, who am I to say this? But I always ask people, okay, well, at what age are you going to at what age are you going to be okay? What is the magical line? Is it 23? Is it 24? Is it 25? When you hit 27, okay, now you're allowed to make content. Like,
Hmm.
where is that line and why do we draw it and why are we so convinced that, I mean, I really think you should judge people on the value of their ideas and the value of what they have to offer, right?
Hmm.
All the other factors should kind of be secondary. I mean, if somebody's saying something true and good, really who they are is, in my mind, secondary. But uh, but yeah, just so maybe just to summarize that point, if you want to develop your lateral thinking, read 3 books at once, although not necessarily literally at once, but have a few books going, and then depending on the mood you're in, allow yourself to taste a little bit of the different
Yeah.
varieties depending on how you feel. You mentioned not placing these limitations on yourself, but also um, uh, uh, something interesting that you said that I'd never considered is actually maybe living the day in a different way. Actually
Hmm.
looking at the routines you possibly have and seeing how you can approach the day differently, and as a consequence, maybe see yourself differently and think differently.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
It's kind of like whenever you do something so different, like I went, it was June, forget exactly what day it was, but I was, scouting a location to look at if I was going to shoot a film there. And it just turned into a big adventure. And so, I have that vivid memory of this was June, maybe 11th or 10th, somewhere in there. And so it's kind of, and that one just comes up as like, I don't know. The other day, I randomly was able to remember that at work, and I think that they were like, "Wow," I don't know. That's like eidetic memory. Not really, but you get those vivid dates in your mind, and you're able to remember more clearly. And I think also it just it gives you something new, to change up the routine, to explore something new. And i think I think that has a lot of value towards, reorienting yourself towards, seeing things differently, and living a bit differently. It's sometimes, you're probably going to be at work, or things along those lines. Maybe it's just, I don't know, going a few different places, whether it's for lunch or something along those
Mm.
those lines. It really depends, but I think that there's a lot of value to, um, just that variety, and
Yeah.
being able to change things up for inspiration's sake.
Yeah. It makes me think of that expression, variety is the spice of life. But I'm now,
Mhm.
it now just occurred to me that, well, if variety is the spice of life, then that means that every day you're eating a meal. And well, then variety being the spice of life would mean that you're actually spicing up the meal
Mhm.
by altering the way you do things, and maybe reading a book that you normally wouldn't ever pick up, or watching a
Mhm.
film or a series in a different language, or just exposing yourself, having a conversation with a person that comes from a completely different world than you do. Um,
Absolutely.
I'd love to just maybe ask you if you could point out to me and maybe to the people watching where we could, if someone's watching this and they haven't heard of you or your work, where could they find you? So this is kind of like promo time. You can just
Yeah.
let us know what is your online presence? Where can people find your newsletter and all the rest?
So yeah, laterally is the biggest, I think, touch point for me right now, to I suppose, route everybody in. And that is laterally.substack.com, laterally.substack.com. You can also find me, if you Google Clayton J. Hester. I've got fairly good SEO, which is kind of nice, because it's just kind of like sprung up here, as I've begun to be a little bit more prolific here on the interweb. But it's been a nice development. So that has been a good change. That's been good. You can find me on Twitter, where I try to stay active. I've been attempting to scale up my social media to, um, to really become much more involved and put much more content of value onto those locations. At Clayton J. Hester on there. And on Instagram is at Clayton J. Hester. And you can find me on Facebook as well if you're all about Facebook still. And so I still post there. And so that's good. But yeah, Laterally is my main touch point right now. Here in the next several months, I'm going to be launching our basically what we've got going on as a podcast network. It's coming out here in the here in February, and so it's not something I have publicized in a lot of ways, but here a little bit of exclusive. I've mentioned it a few other places, so I don't know. But you'll be able to get all of that through the newsletter there at laterally.substack.com. And so anyway, yeah.
Well, awesome. I will say, since reading your newsletters and checking them out, and they're so consistent, so it's refreshing, and I must say I find myself thinking about thinking more. I find myself thinking about creativity more. I find myself thinking about actually seeing the various interests I have as a good thing, as a generalization, and starting to see specialization as something that's meant for insects. So having this kind of general view, your newsletters really changed that in a positive way. So I would encourage anyone who wants to get regular quality updates on just thinking creatively, definitely to go and check out Laterally. It's definitely worth your time. And Clayton, I think we're gonna have to call it there, just because
Sure.
I live in a country where we have systematic power outages. So I'm gonna have to call it there before the lights go out on us, which is maybe a topic for another episode. But let me just say a huge thank you for your time and for the conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Dylan. I really appreciate the opportunity. It's been an absolute pleasure.